The USCCB held its first ever virtual fall meeting. Here with analysis is editor of Catholic World News and visiting fellow at Thomas More College, Philip Lawler. He joins us via Skype from New Hampshire. Phil, I want to begin with what USCCB President Archbishop Gomez had to say regarding President-elect Biden at the end of the Bishops' Conference this week. Watch.
For only the second time, we are anticipating a transition to a president who professes the Catholic faith. The president-elect has given us reason to believe that his faith commitments will move him to support some good policies. This includes policies in favor of immigration reform, refugees, and the poor, and against racism, the death penalty, and climate change. He has also given us reason to believe that he will support policies that are against some fundamental values we hold dear as Catholics. These policies include the repeal of the Hyde Amendment and the preservation of Roe versus Wade. Both of these policies undermine our preeminent priority of the elimination of abortion.
Phil, your reaction to this statement, it was at the very end of the public sessions this week. Should Biden assume the presidency, does this put the bishops in a tough position?
Sure it does. And there's a little bit of a backstory to this announcement by Archbishop Gomez in that he had, I think, jumped the gun in welcoming Biden to the presidency, as it were, making a statement before it was necessary to make any statement at all. He didn't have to say anything. So he looked as if he was welcoming Biden's election. And this is a little bit of a counterpoint, and a very necessary one, because you have someone who proclaims the Catholic faith, who is at odds with the Catholic faith on the most important political issue of our time. And that's at best confusing and at worst scandalous.
And is creating a committee, which is chaired by Archbishop Vigneron, to navigate the relationship between the church and the assumed president-elect, is this ultimately productive? They made that announcement at the meeting as well.
It's productive in this sense. It shows that the conference has a conscience. It shows that there are some bishops, apparently a majority of bishops, who recognize that this is a very serious problem. It's obviously a problem that the American bishops should have dealt with long ago. And by long ago, I don't mean a few months ago during this campaign. I mean a few decades ago, when this dodge of saying I am personally opposed, but first reared its ugly head. But it's a step, I suppose, in the right direction. Committees don't tend to do very much, but in this case, the formation of the committee is enough to tell me that we have bishops who are concerned, and rightly should be, about what a Biden administration would bring.
Yeah, it does set up a conflict of teaching authority, if you will, because you will have Biden living, claiming I'm a Catholic and this is what it means to be a good Catholic in the public sphere. And the bishops may or may not be saying something else. I mean, let's face it, even members of their own confreres, their own conference, went out there during the campaign and said, well, Biden supports, climate change legislation and he's good on immigration. He wants open borders. So this is a good thing. This is a good Catholic, ignoring the entire panoply of those preeminent issues, including abortion on demand. What can the bishops achieve by forming an initiative like this? I mean, do they have enough influence, I guess, is the real question, to alter public perceptions, Catholic perceptions, and legislation in D.C.?
That's a really good question. They definitely had that influence, as I say, 20, 30 years ago. Whether they have it now is an open question, but better late than never, I suppose. And I think that another thing that you need to keep in mind or keep in view is Archbishop Gomez very carefully identified Biden as someone who professes the Catholic faith, not as a Catholic in good standing. And I think that crucial distinction should not be lost on your viewers. They should recognize that Gomez is implicitly telling us that Biden is not right with the Catholic Church. That addresses the question of the teaching authority there.
Well, here's the problem with that, though, Phil. Even as there are legal challenges in precincts all across the nation, Pope Francis called to congratulate Biden on his win and said he's looking forward to working with him on migration and the environment. Now, Biden's already said he would be increasing the number of refugees coming into the U.S. from 125,000 or up to 125,000, which is above the 15,000 the Trump administration allowed in. And we should say the USCCB has received millions of dollars in federal grants for resettling migrants. In 2018, they received $363.9 million from the federal government, and 2018 was a slow year. In 2017, they received $531.5 million. Your reaction to that call?
The Pope's call to Biden, like Archbishop Gomez's early call to Biden or statement to Biden, I think reflect that the Catholic leadership is anxious to make peace with Biden at a time when Biden has given every indication that he's going to make war on Catholic doctrine. And that's not the way to respond to the kind of aggressive behavior. I mean, look, Biden has already said he's going to try to drag the Little Sisters of the Poor before the Supreme Court for their fourth appearance there. He's already said that he hopes to enshrine Roe v. Wade forever and overturn the Hyde Amendment. I mean, this is a leader who has pledged to make war on Catholic principles. And I'm sorry to say that you put your finger on it, that the American bishops have taken so much money from the federal government, and he who pays the piper calls the tune very often. There is a compromise involved there that is inimical to the Catholic faith.
Phil, when did immigration, refugee resettlement, and climate change become the central moral issues in Catholicism? Is this where the church is today, where these are the preeminent issues?
No, those are not preeminent issues. Those are prudential matters. You know, there are all sorts of issues that you can cite as important to everyone. For instance, eliminating poverty. We're all for eliminating poverty. We differ on how we should do it. We're all for humane treatment of refugees. We differ on what are the limits of national sovereignty and national security. Those are prudential issues, and the Catholic Church doesn't teach on prudential issues. There are other issues, such as whether or not marriage should be redefined by the state, whether or not human life should be separate. Those are Catholic issues that should be upheld. They're not commensurate. They're not the same sort of issues.
Turning to the McCarrick report, which was released last week, the bishops discussed during their fall assembly the report in some detail, and there were a few takeaways. I want to play these reactions to you. This starts with Bishop Strickland of Tyler, Texas.
If you go down the list of the 7 deadly sins, lust, greed, gluttony, wrath, sloth, envy, pride, pretty much the report covers all of them. McCarrick failed sinfully on the level of clerical chastity, abuse and grooming and manipulation of minors and adults, in homosexual activity. There's still very much a tendency in the world and in the church to turn a blind eye to many of these sins.
I think it's unfortunate, though, is the media reports that have come out that have tried to paint St. John Paul II as somehow culpable for all this.
The McCarrick report shows us the danger of relationships wrongly ordered. This painful exercise has shown me signs of hope.
Philip, your thoughts on the bishop's reactions to the McCarrick report and the outstanding questions raised by the report?
Well, Bishop Strickland got it right, as he tends to do. This is a report that illustrates the 7 deadly sins in action. What the American bishops need to come to grips with, and the report does not come to grips with, is their own culpability for being silent on this. I simply cannot believe that while I was aware of McCarrick's misbehavior 25 years ago that the American bishops were not equally aware of it. In fact, the report shows not only that some bishops were aware of it, but they essentially lied about it to the Vatican, to Pope John Paul II, prompting him to make an unfortunate decision to appoint McCarrick to Washington. There's an awful lot of soul searching that should be done, not least on the question of the money that changed hand. And there, Bishop Strickland talks about greed. You know, the report says that the lavish gifts that McCarrick was throwing around didn't seem to influence or were not determinative in influencing his
Right.
career. Well, I'm sorry, again, I simply don't believe that. When you get large financial gifts from people, you tend to think more highly of them than people who don't send you financial gifts. And if it is, as the report says it is, if it is a common practice among bishops to give each other large cash gifts, I think that's a corrupt practice and it should be rooted out.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. One of the bishops said that the names of the people who were beneficiaries of McCarrick's gifts, those should have been listed in the report. But it omits a lot, contrary to some of the reportage we saw last week. There are a lot of missing pieces in that McCarrick report, and it spares many of the living while damning and condemning the dead. A somewhat different focus on the report came from Cardinal Blaise Cupich of Chicago. Here's what he had to say.
We have to make sure that we never again have a situation where anyone from our conference is taking sides in this with the Holy Father or challenging him or even being with those who are calling for his resignation.
Now, Phil, if it weren't for the challenges that Pope Francis got concerning McCarrick, would this report have happened at all?
Not at all. And you can see that in the report because the primary villain of the report is Archbishop Vigano, whose challenge to Pope Francis was the reason why there was a need to have this report, why the public demanded this report. And so the whistleblower is painted as the bad guy with very little evidence, by the way, and someone who has been aligned with McCarrick through his career, like Cardinal Cupich, now tells us that the real problem is clericalism. Well, that's not the real problem. The real problem here is that there is a network within the Catholic hierarchy that advances people like McCarrick, and that network should be identified and rooted out.
Bishop Mark Brennan of Wheeling, Charleston, proposed the following for future vetting of bishops. I'd like your reaction to this.
Once a determination has been made that this particular priest ought to be made a bishop, it does seem to me it would be helpful to avoid future problems. That name be published and it give you a time frame of 30 to 60 days for people to comment. You might well surface things at that time that would affirm the appointment or deter it.
Philip, what do you make of that suggestion? Should we expect any changes for the way bishop candidates are vetted or bishops-elect are vetted?
I don't anticipate much in the way of changes. I was intrigued by Bishop Brennan's idea. My first reaction is negative. I do think something has to be done, but more than anything procedural, what we need is accountability. With this, as with the original sex abuse problem, the root of the problem is not that we lack the mechanisms to deal with it. The root of the problem is that the people who are in charge of dealing with it did not do their job. And that's certainly the case with the McCarrick report. The McCarrick report does tell us very clearly about all the people who had an opportunity to blow the whistle and didn't do it until Archbishop Vigano came along.
Yeah, and then they tried to depict him as he's the errant, he's the bad guy who had really nothing to do with McCarrick's ascension. He was only there picking up the pieces on the back end after, McCarrick was on his way out of office or out of office. The bishops did talk about personal accountability throughout their meeting, where they would hold each other accountable. Is that sufficient? Is that enough, Philip?
Yes, it would be enough if they ever did it. Talking about it won't get it done.
Bishop Sean McKnight of Jefferson City made this point regarding the lay role in all of this. Watch.
We cannot be belabored by the notion that a man with power and authority can somehow get out of this kind of accusation. We as a church need to use all resources that we have available to us. And in many instances, that will be found in lay people who are skilled and qualified in investigating these kinds of accusations.
What's the role of the laity after the Vatican report on McCarrick? He suggested, the bishop there, that qualified lay people should investigate these accusations. But aren't they doing that in some instances with these accountability boards and things in different dioceses?
Well, they are. It would be interesting to put somebody on the case who is in effect qualified to act as a private investigator, somebody who has real detective skills to look into rumors such as the rumors with McCarrick, and that could be done on the basis of confidentiality. And I should think that any worthwhile private investigator would have been able to confirm that in this case, where there was smoke, there's plenty of fire. More than that, bishops need to listen to lay people. And again, it comes down to, are they listening? Are they doing their jobs? Because lay people do have the opportunity to speak. The question is anybody listening?
Right. Well, remember they had the National Review Board many years ago. Governor of Oklahoma was there, Bill Burley, some great people. My pal Bob Bennett, the attorney in Washington, and these were a collage of people, outsiders, laity who were concerned. Some of them had investigatory skills. That National Review Board didn't end so well, Phil. They kind of sidelined that board.
Yeah, well, again, you recall when the original Governor Keating, the first chairman of the board,
right,
was under so much pressure that he likened the bishops' conference to the mafia. And he, a former prosecutor, knows what it's like to tangle with the mafia. It's, again, a question of when they do their job, will the bishops listen? And there's no way around the accountability of bishops as leaders for the church.
Well, I've always said at the end of the day, Phil, it's going to depend on the laity in the pew withholding their contributions until that transparency is made manifest in all areas, financial, moral, and otherwise. It's important. They're really good about talking about the people of God, but they often approach the people of God like this, with their hands over their ears, and we need to really communicate and have the dialogue everybody claims they want to have. Moving on to another topic that was discussed at the conference. There was an ad hoc committee against racism, which was voted on unanimously to be extended another 3 years. I'd like your reaction to something Archbishop William Lawler of Baltimore added. Listen.
Part of the recommendations from the Journey to Racial Justice pastoral letter is that we needed to have archdiocesan-wide conversations about race. There's a lot of people who don't think they need to have such conversations because they don't think they have a racist bone in their body. The reality, of course, for all of us, myself included, is much different.
Is there a crisis of racism in the Catholic Church today, Phil?
There is a crisis when the Catholic Church, the leadership of the Catholic Church, thinks of this as the biggest issue that they have to tackle. Are there racists in the Catholic Church? I'm sure there are. We all have our own preferences and in some cases our biases. It's just not the biggest issue that the Catholic Church has to face right now.
Archbishop Alexander Sample of Portland, Oregon, where so much of this violence has taken place, defended his city and peaceful protesters and had this to say about adopting popular slogans.
I think that we need to be careful about adopting simple catchphrases and slogans or affiliating with this movement or that movement. I think as a church, we need to speak from our own tradition.
The Catholic Church has had its own varied history in the U.S. when it comes to the issue of race. How should the church help to heal the nation with the divide in parts of the country? And I do think it's isolated to certain sectors in the country. It's not a nationwide problem.
Well, Raymond, I'm realizing that several of your questions here really come down to the same thing, which is should the American bishops, should the American church leadership be taking cues from the secular culture? Should the church be worried about whatever is in the headlines of the Washington Post and the New York Times, whether that's racism or climate change or the death penalty? And the answer is no. And there, Archbishop Sample definitely has it right. The church has some clout, has some ability to influence people when the church speaks as the church. If the church is speaking as one more sounding board for the latest, the most popular opinion of the talking heads in Washington, no offense, then the church
I'm
loses
not in
all that.
Washington. It's okay. I'm in New Orleans, so it's okay. Here's my question, Phil. I think you raise a very important point, because the church's real role is to shape hearts and souls for heaven. That's what this is, I thought, about. And if they were doing their job and properly catechizing people, they would naturally want to care for the environment, care for other people, reach out to the poor. Those things would be the natural overflow of a well-formed conscience. And they'd want to protect the life of the unborn and the frail elderly. That would all be part of the basic teaching. It would be basic foundation for any Catholic. But because things are so willy-nilly and broken, we now have them grasping at straws, trying to, I guess, be relevant, latching on to these contemporary issues as they pop up. And it just seems everybody's at sea. And I think Catholics see through that and are confused by it, frankly.
Yes, very much so. The question is, which way is the cultural influence flowing? Is the popular culture influencing the church, which would be a negative, or is the church exerting her influence in a positive way on the popular culture? Is the church leaving the imprint of Christianity, the message of the gospel, on the popular culture? That's really what our job should be here. And when you hear in this time of epidemic, when you hear bishops saying our top priority is the physical health of our people, no, it's not. The top priority is the spiritual health of the people. Physical health is secondary. It flows from that. And if you get the order wrong, you lose all of your own proper authority.
Well, before we go, Edward Penton reports this week that a controversial former Franciscan priest, who was sanctioned, by the way, by the Vatican in the 1980s for disseminating Marxist ideology, liberation theology, he's a keynote speaker at the Vatican's Economy of Francesco conference. Your thoughts on this, and what is happening here?
Well, of course, you're speaking of Leonardo Boff, who is one of the founders of the liberation theology movement. He was a Franciscan friar. He left the priesthood. He was disciplined by the Vatican, I think it was 1985, when the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith said that his work showed a profound misunderstanding of Catholicism. And now he's invited to the Vatican to talk on economics. One lesson that I get from this is we can't really credit anymore the people who are telling us that there is a smooth transition from Pope Benedict to Pope Francis. In fact, there's an abrupt shift. This is a man, Boff, who referred to then Cardinal Ratzinger as a terrorist, as the angel of death. That's not, this isn't gentle criticism. This is outward hostility. And when he is welcomed now to the Vatican under Pope Francis as a leading speaker, that tells me that there is no such thing as a smooth transition at the top in Rome.
We will leave it there. Philip Lawler, you can read Philip's commentary at catholicculture.org. His most recent book, The Smoke of Satan, is available at bookstores everywhere and online. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you.